The Interstate at night is a long confession. It tells you everything about the country you live in and most of what you don't want to know about yourself. The pumps at exit 244 hissed like snakes in a dream. The parking lot glowed the sickly yellow of a bruise. I had one duffel, $22, and a promise to myself that Iowa would be a place I left rather than became. He picked me out like I was a word he already knew how to pronounce. "Headed west?" he asked through the open window of his cab, voice easy as buttered toast. The tractor was white in the half-light, the trailer a long rumor. He leaned across and pushed the passenger door open with 2 fingers, like a gentleman with a car he hadn't earned. "I can put you as far as Omaha," he added. "Farther if we keep each other awake." I'd been practicing the sentences you say to stay alive. "No. I'm waiting. I've got someone. My ride is inside paying." I'd been practicing all day in my head, and none of them volunteered to come out when I needed them. His face was ordinary in the weaponized way that lets men walk through neighborhoods and never trouble a curtain. Close-cut hair, a kind of handsome that photographs well at the DMV. Pleased but not proud of his own neatness. If you'd asked me then to draw danger, I would have sketched anyone but him. "You look like a careful girl," he said, reading me. "Careful girls don't get in with strangers. Smart girls make exceptions for people who can talk to them like they're people." He tipped his chin toward the sky, as if the night were a witness he wanted to impress. "Name's Brian." I asked him for the company name before I asked for anything else. The tractor's door had a DOT number, and in vinyl with ambition, Martin on the side panel. Not quite the letters I was used to seeing on trucks, but the world is so full of names you can convince yourself any one of them is the right kind. The company clipboard on the passenger seat, mileage sheets filled in with Boy Scout neatness, made my suspicion feel like bad manners. "Sure," I said. "Omaha." "Buckle up," he said, smiling the way gas stations make you smile because you're always leaving someone, even if it's just yourself. The cab had the smell of a person who has tried to war with smells, a sweetness that wasn't sugar, pine from a paper tree that had given up, coffee and something else, under it the breath of rope. His sleeper was folded like a cot in a resented barracks. A towel had been fussed to square on top of it. A coil of line sat on the shelf behind my seat, neat as a sermon. I told myself men like him carry rope for the same reason they carry spare belts. The world breaks and you fix it. That's all. We rolled onto I-80 and the lights fell away like obligations. Des Moines, Omaha, Wyoming, if you want to play games with distance. The tires sang the same syllable over and over. Go, until it stopped meaning anything. He drove with the kind of patience that lets a man be alone with himself without witnesses. There was a radio murmur, a CB whispering in a language of letters and mile markers, the tone of men who know where the scales are and which cop likes to sit in the dark. He asked about me the way you ask for proof someone belongs in your truck. Where from? Who to? What for? I gave him Iowa City and friends and work, because I'd learned what happens when you give people nouns they can verify. He gave me nothing that could be fact-checked. Brian, landscaping in the summer when he's off the road. Candle business as a hobby. A line he said like a joke that might pay rent if you laughed. Wax remembers, he said, as if he were telling me a secret that wasn't important yet. You heat it, and it learns your hands. Candles, I said, and tried not to imagine what he wanted to fix in place. He kept up a glide path of conversation that never quite touched down. Weather, wages, the sin of teenagers who think truck stops are their living rooms. He talked about policies instead of rules, like life was a manual, and he'd passed the quiz. He did not ask permission when he corrected my pronunciation of a town west of Council Bluffs. He pulled a face that was mostly kindness when I said I'd never been farther than Denver. He waited until Grand Mound to get personal. You smoke, he asked. No. Drink? When it's rude not to. Do you scare easy? Depends on who's trying. Me? He said. I looked out into the dark the way you look into a mouth and try to see if it's a smile or a wound. Not yet, I said. That pleased him. He dragged it out. We're going to be friends, he said later, just past the 255, voice light as glass. Are we? I asked. Friends are people who understand the same rules, he said. You look like someone who keeps promises. What kind? The kind you make to yourself, he said, and I hate how good that sounded in my chest. He knocked the steering wheel twice with the side of his fist, a habit that seemed like punctuation when you didn't want to say amen. He put a hand on the lower left of my seat to adjust the air bladder. A nice gesture. A seen you gesture. The seat lifted a whisper, and the world tilted in a way that made it easier to believe in him. His knuckles brushed my hip, and like someone who knows what to notice, I noticed that he wasn't seeing whether I'd flinch. He was measuring the distance to my belt. "Got to stop in a minute," he said, as we floated by the green sign for Wilton. "Check a strap! You want coffee?" "Yes," I said, because I needed to hear the door twice more before I decided what the night was going to be. The lot at the Wilton exit had that haunted feel. Empty buildings get when they still keep their lights on for pride. He idled in the far corner, away from men who actually haul and women who keep their eyes pointed at the ground for safety. He set the brake and did the ritual of switches. He sat with his hand on the keys and looked at me in the reflection on the windshield, both of us ghosts on the glass. "Door stays locked," he said. "You get out when I get out." "Okay," I said. "You need to pee, you tell me," he said. "Don't get cute and go without me. The lot is full of men who have no use for cute." "Okay," I said and bent to reach for my duffel. He clicked his tongue and I stopped. The sound was the kind that trains dogs. It slid under my skin like an opinion I couldn't argue with fast enough. "I said after me," he said, but somehow still smiling. He took the keys and pocketed them. When he climbed down, I had a clean window of escape. Unlock, fling, run. The problem with windows is that they're made of glass you can see yourself in. I saw a girl who had got in, and I told myself I was not yet the kind who got out screaming. Pride is the cheapest handcuff. He came to my side of the cab, late night quiet, making the eastbound sound like a far-off river. He opened the door and the little dome light did its dumb, warm thing. He didn't reach to help me down. He watched to see if I knew how to balance on the steps without falling. I did. He looked pleased. He had done nothing yet that wasn't a courtesy you could explain. The coffee machine inside hissed at him when he'd already decided what it owed him. He got 2 lids, 2 creams, extra sugar. He handed me the cup like it was a test I'd study for in the morning. "Don't drink all of it right away," he said. "You'll need it later." "For what?" I said. He smiled, looked past me, and made the man at the register think we were a couple. The man at the register returned the favor, seeing what he needed to get through a long night in a town that doesn't have enough reasons to wake up. Back on the road, the CB crackled with codes none of us are born knowing. "You ever get lonely?" I asked him, and watched the question hit him like a bug on the glass. "Lonely is for people who think the world owes them company," he said. "I prefer quiet." He let it hang. The quiet was a room. We both entered it and decided where to sit. "Take a nap," he said, as if he cared. "I've got it." "I never sleep easy in other people's plans," I said. He laughed. "Good line," he said, like a man who collects them. I missed the first click as a sound. It was nothing, the little plastic pat of something saying closed. He had the second one in his fingers already, the way a magician picks the next card before you know you were playing. "Cold?" he asked. "No." "You sure?" he said, moving the seat belt at such a natural angle I thought he was being solicitous. He pulled it out of its feed and gave it that jaunty little tension people give buckles when they want to perform goodwill. He handed me the tongue and I let him. He watched me snap it. "Good girl," he said, and the lie and the praise prickled my skin. Helpful men often have the exact tool they need exactly where their hand lands. He reached behind my head, like he was fixing a kink in the belt so it wouldn't rub my shoulder raw. I opened my mouth to thank him. That's when he pinned the webbing between his fist and the seat back and pulled it hard enough to win an argument. The belt bit. It wasn't dramatic, it was efficient. The diagonal tightened across my chest, a kind of hug no one wrote poems about. The lap strap learned what a knot is. My whole body had to decide in under a second how much politeness it was willing to die for. "Stop!" I said. "Look at me," he said. I did, because I am a person who does what voices tell me to when they are the only thing in a moving room that knows the end of the sentence. "I like tidy," he said, and then he smiled. Polite, apologetic even, while he slid something under the belt where it crossed my ribs. A loop, flat and soft at first, like a friendship bracelet. The loop had teeth in it that liked moving only one way. "Don't," I said. "It's safer," he said. "I don't want you flying if I have to break." "You're not supposed to use," I started, and there it was, that little ratchet sound, like the world agreeing with him one notch at a time. He tucked the excess tail behind the belt pad and patted it like he'd tied a bow that deserved to be admired. "No," I said again, but the no came out like a note I couldn't tune yet. "Please," I added, and the please made him almost blush with satisfaction. There are men who only like their names when you preface them with please. He didn't put his hand on my throat. Not yet. He put it on my knee like a man about to pray there. 10 minutes, he said, echoing a promise I hadn't made. "Then you're done being nervous." "I'm not nervous," I said. "You are," he said, gentle as a father and twice as sure. "It's the part I like the least." He took his hand back, and the truck grew 3 sizes. The line behind my ribs made my lungs write smaller letters. He talked to me about rest areas, like they were museums he was going to take me to, because I didn't have the education to understand them alone. He talked about the way the prairie unconvinces everything. He talked about wind like it was a woman you have to earn the right to touch. He had a favorite rest stop west of Council Bluffs, a place with flickering vending machines and a custodial closet that never locked right. He wanted to show it to me. He wanted to teach me to see. "Bathroom," I said, the word opening in my mouth like a knife. "Soon," he said. "Now," I said. "You think you're negotiating," he said, avuncular almost. "You're not." "Then pull over," I said. "I'll make a mess you don't know how to clean." That landed. Neat men hate mess made by other people's decisions. He checked his mirror like he'd learned to pretend that mattered, signaled like he wanted the world to praise his manners, and eased into a lit pullout with a picnic table and a trash can that had seen things but never told. No other semis. One car facing the wrong way, empty of anyone I could ask for help without teaching them my trouble. He put it in neutral, set the brake, looked at me, and waited for me to make the mistake of not asking. "Please," I said. "You'll be good," he said. "I'll be fast," I bargained. He didn't say okay. He opened his door and came around. He opened mine and stood where the steps would force me to meet his eyes on the way down. "No running," he said. "No screaming. You can try one of those. Not both. It's an insult how good the stars look when you're scared." I climbed down, which is not how you leave a trap. It's how you enter a smaller one. The air smelled like cut grass, diesel, and a sweetness that didn't belong to either. He walked me by the elbow toward the restroom building, complicated enough to pretend to be shelter, his fingers respectful in the sense that he did not dig in right away. Right hand, not left. His left lived near his belt buckle, where he kept the weight that convinces people the rules have changed. Inside, I did not see anyone who would save me. He let me go into the women's room alone because neat men want what they take to have been an act of permission at every stage. I went into the first stall because my body still thinks routine is safety. I locked the flimsy door. I sat and did not pee. I bent down and bit the tail of the nylon loop. I tried to worry it backward through teeth that do not backward. It smiled at me without moving. I sat up and counted to a number that would make a person outside believe you were only a person inside. When I opened the door, he was there. He had his back turned like that should pass for decency. He pivoted before I could create my first syllable and let his face be disappointing rather than cruel. "Good girl," he said again. The words did not offer the exit he thought they did. "Water?" he asked, holding a bottle to my mouth the way a coach does for an athlete he has money on. I drank, because water is what you take when you are planning to be loud. He walked me back to the truck, the way a man walks a dog he intends to keep. The freight of the night shifted toward the side with his weight. My lungs learned the topography of the strap. The duffel in the footwell looked like a lie I had told myself about independence. He stepped up into the cab, tugged the belt with 2 fingers so lazily you wouldn't think it was a gesture. The nylon's tiny animal purred. "I don't like hurting people," he said conversationally as we slid onto the interstate again. "It makes the end messy. I like clean. I like order." He looked at my hands. "You're not going to scratch me, are you?" "No," I said. "You're not going to bleed on my seat." "I'm not bleeding." "You will if you make me teach you how to behave," he said. He said it so politely that a part of me wanted to thank him for the warning. He drove as if to give me time to agree. We passed 2 exits where there would have been witnesses, and he gave them to me as gifts he could take back. He asked me how many breaths I take when I'm scared. He asked me if I've ever held my own throat just to see what kind of person I'd be if I were someone else. He asked me if anyone would miss me tonight or only in the morning. He asked like he was a scientist and I was a good experiment. "You're not my first," he added, like an apology for the lack of specialness. I looked at his hands on the wheel and then at the little spider crack in the windshield dead center low, where a rock must have gotten bored of being good and jumped. I looked at the pull chain for the sleeper curtain. I looked at the CB handpiece. It sat in its cradle like a lifeguard on a break. I looked at the hazard light button. "You're gonna let me go," I said, picking a timeline and putting my name on it. "When we're done," he said. "What is done?" "When I can tell you obeyed," he said, "and I can tell myself I didn't make a mistake bringing you. It's a long road. I have to amuse myself somehow." "You could turn on the radio and sing," I said. "I don't sing," he said. "You could call someone you love," I said. He smiled. "I collect quiet," he said. "It behaves." I put my hands in my lap the way girls are taught, and I let him think I was practicing. In my right palm, I palmed the plastic lid from the coffee cup. It had the word caution on it, raised like a prayer. While he stared the road down, I slid the thin rim of the lid into the spot where nylon kissed nylon close against the belt. I made a wedge. I made friction meet doubt. A thing once true about zip loops. Some of them hate geometry that isn't theirs. He glanced and saw only a girl holding her own stomach like she was carsick. He put a hand out, palm up. "Stop." And I did. He loved me for it. The road evened. The sky got smaller. He changed lanes and the signal was a metronome. He raised his left hand and rolled his shoulder like a man who repairs his own body as it complains. While he stretched, I slid the lid again where the teeth were and felt one catch skip. A knot in the song. My heart knocked like a neighbor who's sick of your party. "Brian," I said, and he hummed acknowledgement, as if he disliked the name the way you dislike the brand of cereal you buy because it's always there. "I have asthma," I lied and gave myself credit for convincing myself first. "If you put anything near my face, I'll puke all over your neat." "Don't make me," he said. "Don't make me." He said it like it pained him. "Don't go weak." "Then let me go," I said. "We'll see," he said. "Now," I said. He didn't look at me. He was busy winning the argument with the road. He tapped the wheel twice again in that punctuation, and the motion jostled the belt just enough to make the lid bite down. One more push, a flex of a wrist that had learned certain letters, and the loop slipped a hair. Not off. Not enough to celebrate. Enough to teach my hands that matter can be asked to change its mind. I pictured the kind of girl I wanted to be by morning, one who could say I fought without lying. The kind of girl who knew that weapons can be plastic if you have prayer, friction, and an insult to offer God. He said one stop. Then quiet. And the way he said quiet had more hunger in it than the word deserved. He signaled, drifted onto a long ramp with a sign that promised coffee again and bathrooms and salvation if you already lived there. A place with a laundromat that never sleeps and a Sonic where nobody eats inside. The lot had 3 other trucks in corners and a cop car with its lights off on the far side like an art piece about performative safety. He parked facing the building, which is as cocky as it sounds. He did the brake and the switches. He reached for my belt with the practiced care of someone who values the illusion of gentleness. "Don't touch me," I said, and smiled when I said it so he would think I was soft. "Please," he said. "Don't," I said. "I will scream." "You'll embarrass both of us," he said. "I have to do this right." "I don't owe you right," I said, and then I put both of my hands on the hazard light switch and mashed. The truck coughed red in every direction like a heart attack. The cab lit us up and showed us to each other. His face understood then. I was the wrong girl. Not because I was stronger or smarter, because I had decided that shame was cheaper than dying neat. He moved for my wrist. I moved for his eyes with my medish. No like a tooth. He drew back 1 inch, and in that inch I found the time to jam the cup lid harder into the angle of the nylon. The plastic shrieked. 1 tooth of the loop cried Uncle, then 2, then the slither. He caught my hand too late. He dug his thumb into that tender spot everyone has, and I yelped, my body doing me the favor of making noise while I was busy with breath. Outside? The red blinked, and a man who had been smoking under the crime of a light said, "Hey, at nobody in particular, which is how attention arrives." "Turn it off," he hissed. It was almost polite. "No," I said, and I swallowed the pain in my wrist whole and went for the horn. My palm hit plastic. The truck bellowed a grief so big it should have had a name. The cop car across the lot woke like an animal that had only been pretending to sleep. The smoker shouted, "Whoa!" and took 2 steps backward as if the sound had pushed him. The automatic doors of the travel center consented to slide open. Brian, if that was his name, picked his new favorite option. Run. But neat. He reached for the keys just as I snatched the belt free and tore the nylon out with it. We fought on a front porch made of fabric and plastic. We writhed against a calendar tacked to the dashboard for a year that did not deserve to be remembered. I jammed my elbow into his collarbone, and he grunted in a tone that suggested I had just ruined a sweater. I threw the door handle, but he had locked it with a motion I didn't see, and my fingers said, "Child locks are for cabs, too." And then the passenger window stuttered down a 1/2 inch because his thumb clipped the wrong switch. Air came in. I screamed into it. Not words. Words would have been a kindness to his conscience. Sound. A fire alarm in a throat. A smoke detector that the batteries have been politely asking you to change for 3 years. He clapped his hand over my mouth, and I bit him. Not clean. Not impressive. Human. He yelped fuck with a suddenness that made his neatness blush. He pulled back, and in the 1/2 second it takes for a man to reconsider whether teeth exist, the cop was there, tapping his flashlight against the window with a tempo that says, "I can be slow about this if you make me." "Everything all right in there?" the officer asked, the scene reflected upside down in the chrome, a dumb poem about America. Brian's face reverted to the expression he'd rehearsed. "She's upset," he said, voice steady, sympathy applied like aftershave. "My girlfriend. We were arguing." I laughed into the air like a person who had to show a text thread to win an untruth. The cop's flashlight hit my cheek, then slid to my wrists, where the nylon left its stigmata. He said ma'am with a caution that could heal. "Step out of the truck," he told the driver. "Now!" Brian hesitated because men like him aren't built for orders they didn't write. He did the key, the door, the yes, officer, the hands where you can see them. I scrambled out like someone learning to use legs. I walked past him and did not meet his eyes because victory is rude when it's alive. The officer pivoted to keep his body between us, politely as if I might complain about the view. He asked me, "Do you need medical attention?" I shook my head too fast and then nodded, because my body wanted a professional to notice it without making me say the words. The lot's orchestra, smoker, cashier, a woman with a paper bag and a stare that could kill snakes, came closer. The cop called in an obsession of acronyms. He asked me to stand in the lit doorway as if light were a badge. He asked him if there were weapons. He asked if there were drugs. He asked if there were anything we needed to know about before we found it. Brian stood like a man learning to be a statue. He gave his license in his real name. I'll learn later. He said the right sentences in the right order, and the only thing wrong with them was that he was saying them. Another cruiser arrived, and someone said Nashua and Waterloo and Iowa, like we were 3 different places you could live inside the same man. The second officer looked in the sleeper and wrote down the presence of rope like it could be an innocent noun. He picked up a bag of zip ties that had opinions about one direction. He touched nothing, and he touched everything. I sat on the curb and made the night remember me. I breathed big enough to make the nylon marks flare and fade like stage cues. I refused coffee and accepted water, and then asked for coffee too, because women learn to be contradictory if it keeps them on the stage. I tried to explain in sentences that didn't sound like they had been written by television. I tried to say the part where the belt was a hand. I tried to say how he asks for quiet like alms, They gave me a blanket because forms love blankets. They took pictures of my wrists because courts love pictures. They asked me if he put anything near my face, and I said no, because telling the truth is a policy that saves you only if a man has already been told he can't take it from you. They cuffed him with a courtesy that almost made me laugh. He looked at me then with that open, astonished expression of men who cannot believe their favorite trick failed. Not angry. Confused. Like the loop had been broken by faulty manufacturing. Like I were a defective product he wanted to return. He said, I was doing her a favor. And maybe that's the truest sentence he has ever said out loud. They put him in the back of the cruiser with a hand on the crown of his head like a blessing. The officer who stayed asked me if I wanted to press charges, and I said yes in a voice only the middle of me could hear. He asked if I had a place to go, and I said I had a friend who would not ask questions until morning. He said, You did the right thing, and I hated it for being true and insufficient. When they drove him away, the hazard lights still blinked for a minute, embarrassed to be the remaining heartbeat. Then a hand reached into the cab and turned them off. The night inhaled. Somewhere eastbound, someone else decided to take a ride with the man who offered in a voice that passed. I would learn names later. Charles City, Nashua, Waterloo. I'd learn Wyoming and Tennessee as if my map had always been missing their true colors. I would learn other names too, the ones the newspapers give to girls when the world refuses to use theirs. Bitter Creek, Jane Doe, names that try to measure dignity with a geography. That night I had one of my own. It did the job. I called a friend who picked up on the second ring and said, Where are you instead of what's wrong? Because some people know how to skip the test and go straight to rescue. I slept on her couch with my shoes on. I dreamed of a belt that told the truth when you pulled it. I woke to the stink of coffee and a day that was willing to believe me. I told my mother later with a cleaned-up version, because mothers do better with summary than detail. She said, My God, like a person whose God still listens. I told the officer everything with the detail mothers aren't supposed to receive. I told him about the way his thumb pressed a place that makes you obedient. I told him about the rope that pretends it's better than what it's for. I told him about the plastic lid. He wrote down cup lid like it might be evidence someday. Will there be a trial? I asked, and the officer gave me a smile that had both maybe and don't wait for it hiding in the corners. Not because of you, he said. Because of what happens next. What happens next? I asked, naive in a way I had not earned the right to be anymore. Men like him don't stop until somebody takes their name away, he said. I kept mine. The second call came 2 weeks later. Different voice, same marrow. We need you to confirm some details, the detective said. He's linked to a case across the state line. The phrase across the state line should always be a horror film. It means the person you met knows how to turn geography into an alibi. I went to the station with a friend who learned that day to sit on the wrong side of the glass and make her face into a wall for me to rest against. They had maps with pins and names that had been replaced by dates. I looked at the dotted line of I-80 like a suture on a body too proud to admit it had been cut open. They asked me if he'd said the word Wyoming. He had. The syllables had been a smile in his mouth. They asked if he'd said Tennessee. Not then. Not to me. But a truck is an excuse to be in too many places. A truck is what happens when the country is a room with a deadbolt nobody checks twice. They showed me the picture every cop knows how to show. A booking photo where the person looks surprised to be in the same face as the one they use in public. It was him, and it wasn't. You don't know how much of a man's attractiveness lives in his authority until someone borrows it from him. He looked older, younger, truer. False. I pointed anyway. The detective nodded as if my finger had done paperwork. What saved you? He asked. Embarrassment, I said. Mine was cheaper than his. He made a face I still like him for, a little flicker of admiration he didn't permit himself to turn into a compliment. He leaned forward, elbows making a steeple out of the file. He's efficient, he said. We think he's efficient. We need the part of your memory that lives in your hands. I described the belt. He drew it on a sheet with rectangles and triangles as if the court would need it to be a map. I described the loop. He wrote zip tie and nylon and ratchet in the space where the words would put sugar in their mouths if you let them. I described the sound it made, chick, which is the worst instrument in the orchestra. He asked me to say it again and then said it himself like a foreigner learning to order in a dangerous restaurant. Chick, he shrugged. We'll find the bag, he said. Optimism doing work disbelief is too lazy to do. Later in the days when people called to see if I was still the same person, I tried to be. I went to the same gas station and bought water in the same aisle. I stood in the same place on my friend's porch and smoked a cigarette I didn't want, because a movie had taught me to. I counted breaths like I'd promised him I would. The loop faded from my wrist, but the mark stayed in the vocabulary. I invented phrases they could hide in when people needed me to talk about weather. Then, much later, when the news learned his name and said it enough for all of us, it came all at once, like bad mail that found every address I'd ever used. He had been born less than an hour from where I had been born, as if we were products of the same factory but made for different customers. He liked rope. He liked quiet. He liked women with nowhere left between the place they were standing and the place he was willing to take them. He was linked by DNA to women whose names were taken from them, while the people who loved them learned to love a geography in its place. Bitter Creek, Sheridan County. Names that never washed off. One woman was 5 months pregnant. Another 3. The sentence in the paper that talked about the babies had the wrong kind of verbs in it. A map in my head changed color. Wyoming stopped being a cowboy and started being a graveyard. Tennessee became a courtroom wearing a tie. The reporters who will live forever on the Monday shift learned to pronounce things they'd willfully ignored, like Nashua and Waterloo and Charles City. Our nouns stolen, interviewed, transformed into evidence. I wanted to drive to the rest area, where it almost turned into the worst version of my life, and stand there with a sign that said, "Don't believe anyone who says they like tidy." I wanted to knock on the woman's door, who had taught me to bring a new pair of shears into my car, and ask her to tell me stories that didn't have trucks in them. I wanted to ask someone to pass a law that made it illegal to call a person Jane when she was born with a name that would have made the people who loved her come sooner. You have to do smaller good things when the big ones don't belong to you. I learned what exits in my town do and don't have working cameras. I learned which counters keep their phones under the register in case you need to dial by pointing. I learned to say no politely, until the person made me say it the old way, and then I didn't apologize for how ugly it sounded. I taught the girl who stocks the candy at the travel center how to tie a loop that she could unmake herself with one hard breath. She laughed, and then she took it home and showed her brother. She told me he'd cried when she put it on his wrist. Not because it hurt. Because someone had thought about how to undo something before it did what it was designed to do. A year later, when they said conviction on a day that always smelled like cut grass in my memory, I poured coffee into a cup with a lid and wrote caution on the top with a marker, in case the universe needed the prompt. I read the line about the jury, guilty, life, and nodded, even though the men who made a sentence have never understood the grammar of what it feels like to be on the other side of it. I saw a photograph of a courtroom where he had to sit while other people said his name and didn't hand it back to him the way he liked. 2 months later, when they said heart attack in hospital and died before extradition, I did not clap. Death does not tidy anything. It just closes the book without putting the folded laundry away. Somewhere in Wyoming, there were still girls without names making a sound none of us subscribed to. Somewhere in Iowa, there was still a truck stop where he had smiled at a register and learned the cost of a coffee. Somewhere in my chest, there was still a loop that remembered one direction. I met a boy at the pumps a month after the conviction story. A kid with a backpack whose shoes were too clean for someone who had been on the road 3 days. He asked me if I knew anyone going west. I said no, and then I taught him to recognize the wrong kind of neat. I told him the belt trick, the way you tell a ghost story, you hope is prophylactic rather than decorative. I handed him a cup lid and made him push it into air with his thumbs until it bit. He looked at me like I was crazy, And then he looked at me like I just taught him how to be rude in a way that gives you birthdays. "You got anyone waiting for you?" I asked. He said a name that didn't have enough consonants to be safe. I wrote down my name. I wrote down 2 numbers. I wrote down, "If he says 10 minutes, that's your cue to run." He said thank you the way young men say it when they're not used to living in a world where women have skills that keep them alive. He kept going west. I kept standing there. The lights above us buzzed. A moth threw itself at a bulb and succeeded at nothing. I went home and tied a piece of ribbon around the handle of my front door in a knot only I could undo with one tug. I slept better that night than the night before. I counted breaths and replaced the ones that didn't scan with new ones. When people ask me what I remember most, it isn't his voice or his hands, or even the way the night folded itself into a smaller idea, until there was only the belt and the loop, and my breath arguing that it still deserved to be named. It's the way his face looked when the hazard lights made us both honest, like a man who has been sleeping in a church and wakes up to find the pews are full. Sometimes I dream him trying the cab door of the life I made after him. He knocks with that 2-finger tap he used on the wheel and waits for me to let him in so he can measure the distance between neat and obedient again. In the dream, I turn the hazard lights on without being in a truck. The whole house blinks red. The neighbors blink with it. The police pull up in my kitchen. He backs away because men like him hate interruptions. I am loud now. I was not loud before. I make ugly noises when I have to, and I have to more than I used to because the world expects you to be tidy about your fear. I do not apologize to people for taking the long way out of rooms. I do not apologize for checking the closet in other people's bathrooms to see if there are towels folded in squares so precise you'd mistake them for instructions. I have not left Iowa. I live 2 exits from the place where I turned a plastic lid into an arrogant theology. I keep a stash of them in a drawer, like a woman who collects the saint cards of what saved her. Sometimes I give them to cashiers when they look like someone who needs to have a plan. Sometimes I give them to boys who think they are too big to be afraid. I tell them, "Wax remembers," which is something he said, and then I correct myself. "You remember. Wax is just a witness. You are the holy thing." There are women whose names I do not get to say here because the paper took the right and I won't steal it. I say them to myself anyway, in a place where it counts. I say Pamela, and I say Irene, and I say Cindy. And when I get to the part where the babies should have their own syllables, I go quiet, because there are silences we owe each other when we run out of good noise. The loop is gone from my wrist. The marks would have faded even if I had wanted to keep them. Skin is an optimist. But my body has kept a record. When men reach their hand into my space too quickly, the muscle under my collarbone gathers itself and prepares to say no to a belt. I let it. I thank it later with hot water and an apology that sounds like a new policy. You asked for a story in 2 parts. The trick is, like him, I break time when I talk about it. There is the before, a girl who thought 10 minutes was a unit you could bargain with. There is the after, a woman who knows no is a pretty word until you make it an instrument. If you want a bow on it, I survived because I chose shame over neatness, because I pressed a plastic lid into a small slot and made a machine remember who built it, because I screamed at a parking lot like I was a person and not a problem. But the truer answer is dull and holy. I survived because someone in a dark car thought the night might be about them and got out to find out. How am I doing now? Well, I keep cup lids in my glove box. I practice turning on the hazard lights with my eyes closed, and I teach strangers that politeness is not a seatbelt. Killer reveal: Clark Perry Baldwin, Iowa-born long-haul trucker linked by DNA to multiple interstate murders. Clark Perry Baldwin, 1961 to 2025, was born in Charles City, Iowa, later living in Nashua and Waterloo. A former long-haul trucker, he was arrested in May 2020 and, through DNA, linked to the 1991 murder of Pamela Rose Aldridge McCall, Tennessee, and 2 1992 Wyoming victims long known as Bitter Creek Betty, identified in 2022 as Irene Vasquez, and Sheridan County Jane Doe, identified in July 2025 as Cindy Estrada. He was convicted in May 2025 for McCall's murder and sentenced to life. He died of a heart attack in July 2025 before extradition to Wyoming. Baldwin had previously attacked a hitchhiker in 1991 who survived, and he's been discussed as a possible suspect in other cases near his roots, including an Iowa truck stop killing, though no charges were filed in those.